The sky cracked with the scream of an eagle as lightning ripped across the horizon. Wind tore through the canyon, shredding silence into fragments of terror. Daniel said, "The storm does not wait for us, it devours us whole." High above, Eleanor said, "The air feels alive, restless and merciless." A sudden flash revealed Richard, locked in a dive, his talons gleaming like blades of bone. The ground below shook as branches splintered and leaves scattered in the violent gusts. Sarah said, "Every sound feels like a warning, every breath tastes like ash." The storm swallowed the light, drowning the canyon in waves of black and silver. Thunder cracked like the bones of giants, each rumble forcing the creatures to cower. Daniel said, "We are nothing before this, only shadows in its fury." From the cliffs, two eagles clashed midair, their wings crashing like shields of steel. Eleanor said, "The sky belongs to no one, yet they tear it apart to claim it." A sharp cry cut through the wind, piercing the storm as though life itself fought against silence. Richard's wings snapped open, defiant, slashing the rain with fire-bright feathers. The storm raged on, but in its chaos burned the law of survival, merciless, immediate, eternal. The storm roared like a beast unchained, its voice louder than any cry of prey or predator. Daniel said, "It wants us buried, swallowed whole, forgotten." Eleanor pulled Sarah closer, her eyes sharp against the chaos. Eleanor said, "We stand only if we endure the breath of the storm itself." Richard fought the gale, each step against the cliff feeling like a battle against unseen hands dragging him down. The eagles above clashed again, feathers torn free like sparks against the night. Sarah whispered, "Why do they fight when the storm itself could end them all?" Thunder devoured her words, silencing innocence. The air grew sharp, metallic, drenched in the scent of lightning and death. Daniel said, "They fight because survival allows no waiting, no mercy." The storm pushed harder, bending trees and shattering stone. Still, the struggle above raged, defiant, endless. The storm's heart pounded against the canyon walls, a pulse older than time. Daniel said, "The earth itself trembles under its weight." Eleanor's voice cut through the roar. Eleanor said, "Storms choose no side, yet they test all the same." Richard stumbled forward, his body bent against the wind's cruel hands. Sarah cried, "It feels alive, like it wants to swallow us whole." Lightning shattered the sky again, briefly revealing the eagles locked in deadly embrace. Their wings tore into each other, feathers raining down like ash. Daniel clenched his fists, his jaw set against the fury. Daniel said, "This is no storm, it is judgment." The wind howled, carrying screams that did not belong to men. The canyon echoed, timeless, relentless, eternal. The rain thickened, pounding skin like shards of ice. Eleanor said, "Hold your ground, or the storm will claim you." Sarah pressed her face against Eleanor's arm, trembling with fear. Daniel raised his eyes to the sky, lightning reflecting in them like fire. Daniel said, "The sky does not forgive weakness." Above them, the eagles clawed and twisted, their shrieks louder than thunder. Richard gasped, "They will kill each other before the storm decides their fate." The wind surged, knocking him to his knees, and Sarah cried out. Eleanor pulled her closer, teeth clenched. Eleanor said, "The storm feeds on fear, do not give it more." The night grew darker still, as if the storm itself hungered for their final breath. The storm clawed at the canyon, as though tearing the world apart piece by piece. Daniel shouted, "Stand or be broken." Eleanor's arms tightened around Sarah, her voice steady. Eleanor said, "Fear is not the end, giving in is." Richard rose from his knees, soaked, teeth clenched with defiance. He whispered, "Let it strike, I will not bow." The eagles broke apart and wheeled in opposite directions, one screeching a call that rattled every stone. Sarah's eyes widened, her whisper trembling. Sarah said, "One must fall, but neither yields." The wind carried her words away, but her fear echoed in all their hearts. Lightning struck again, closer, splitting a tree with fire and smoke. The storm was no longer just fury. It was a law written across the sky, demanding sacrifice. The storm began to loosen its grip, leaving behind a canyon scarred and soaked in silence. Daniel said, "The fury has passed, but its shadow lingers." Eleanor guided Sarah gently, her voice steady. Eleanor said, "Do not fear the silence, child. It speaks of survival." Richard leaned on the broken rocks, his chest heaving, eyes narrowed at the sky. Richard whispered, "It spared us, though I know it was no mercy." The ground steamed with rain, rivers forming from tears of the storm. Sarah trembled, clutching Eleanor's hand tighter. Sarah said, "Why does it hurt to breathe when the storm is gone?" Daniel answered, "Because the air carries the weight of what we almost lost." The cries of the eagles echoed faintly, wings beating through the fading night. Eleanor's gaze followed them, her eyes sharp yet soft. Eleanor said, "They bleed as we bleed, yet still they rise." The silence did not soothe. It pressed heavier than the thunder. Each breath reminded them of their fragility in a world that asked for sacrifice without hesitation. The dawn's fragile light revealed more than survival. It revealed their weakness. Daniel said, "We endured, but endurance is not victory." Sarah pressed against Eleanor, her body trembling with fatigue. Eleanor whispered, "Rest now, for the earth forgives only those who remember their place." Richard sat apart, his gaze fixed on the rising sun, jaw clenched. Richard said, "The sky mocked us, yet I feel it calls me still." The canyon hummed quietly, streams carving paths through broken stone. Birds hidden in the shadows dared not sing. Sarah's voice cracked. Sarah said, "The silence feels heavier than the storm." Daniel's hand gripped a fractured branch, as though anchoring himself to something solid. Daniel said, "The silence tests us more than the thunder." Above them, one eagle faltered, its wing dragging in its flight. Eleanor's eyes followed, her voice firm yet mournful. Eleanor said, "Not all survive the storm, not all return whole." The wounded eagle faltered again, its cry raw and broken. Sarah's voice shook. Sarah said, "It hurts, as though I can feel its pain." Eleanor brushed her hand through Sarah's damp hair. Eleanor said, "It mirrors us, child, carrying scars heavier than wings." Daniel stepped forward, eyes fixed on the struggling bird. Daniel said, "Strength alone does not decide who lives, will does." Richard's fists tightened, rage flickering beneath his exhaustion. Richard growled, "Yet will cannot heal what is already torn apart." The canyon carried the eagle's cry far, like a hymn of survival. Sarah whispered, "If it falls, does the sky lose its heart?" Daniel turned sharply, his voice firm. Daniel said, "The sky loses nothing, only we decide what is lost." Eleanor's gaze softened, but her words carried weight. Eleanor said, "Perhaps survival is not conquest, but carrying on even when broken." The eagle's shadow crossed their faces, broken but unyielding. Daniel said, "See how it drags the storm with it, refusing to bow." Sarah whispered, "If it falls, will another rise to take its place?" Eleanor answered gently, "Some battles leave no heirs, only echoes." Richard's breath caught, his eyes burning. Richard said, "I will not be broken like it. I will not crawl beneath the sky." Daniel's gaze hardened, voice cold as stone. Daniel said, "The sky does not bend to your pride, it breaks it." The canyon winds shifted, lifting the eagle higher for a moment. Sarah gasped, clutching Eleanor's hand. Sarah said, "It fights still, though the sky denies it." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her voice steady. Eleanor said, "That is the law, not victory, but struggle unending." The bird's cry tore through the dawn, piercing them as though it knew their hearts. The eagle steadied itself, wings trembling but wide against the dawn. Sarah said, "It still claims the sky." Daniel's voice carried quiet reverence. Daniel said, "Survival is not clean. It is blood, bone, and will." Eleanor wrapped Sarah close, her tone resolute. Eleanor said, "Remember this moment, child, for it is the weight of life itself." Richard looked upward, fists unclenching, his jaw loosening. Richard said, "Perhaps even broken wings can carve dominion in the sky." The canyon seemed to pause, holding its breath with them. The eagle circled once, slower than before, but its shadow stretched across them like a crown. Sarah whispered, "It does not surrender." Eleanor's eyes glimmered, her voice almost soft prayer. Eleanor said, "Then neither shall we." The storm's memory lingered, but its lesson burned brighter. Fragility was not defeat, and scars did not erase the right to endure. The calm after the storm fractured as shadows stirred along the canyon ridge. Daniel said, "The silence does not last, danger walks in its place." Eleanor tightened her grip on Sarah, her gaze sharp. Eleanor said, "This land waits for weakness, and weakness it hunts." Richard crouched low, eyes narrowing as he spotted movement among the jagged rocks. Richard growled, "Not the storm this time, rivals." Sarah pressed closer, her voice trembling. Sarah whispered, "Why must every dawn carry a new fear?" The canyon echoed with the cry of another eagle, fierce and sharp. Daniel's jaw clenched. Daniel said, "The sky is not theirs, nor ours, but they fight to claim what cannot belong." Eleanor's voice softened but carried warning. Eleanor said, "Survival is not shared, it is seized." Richard rose slowly, fists tight, eyes burning. Richard said, "Then let them come, for I will not yield." The air thickened, tension like the breath before lightning strikes again. The rival eagle shrieked, its cry slicing the air like steel on stone. Sarah covered her ears, trembling. Sarah said, "It feels like the sky itself screams." Daniel scanned the ridges, his voice grim. Daniel said, "Rivals are not storms, they choose their moment with intent." Eleanor's eyes followed the circling shadow. Eleanor said, "It waits patient, testing us before it strikes." Richard spat against the ground, his teeth clenched. Richard said, "Then let it find no weakness, for I have none." Yet his fists betrayed his fear, shaking against the stone. The air seemed to coil, wrapping tighter around them. Sarah whispered, "It watches us, deciding who will fall first." Daniel's voice hardened. Daniel said, "We do not run, we endure." Above, the eagle dove, its wings slicing the sky, defiance written in every feather. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Eleanor said, "Then the test begins." The eagle's dive split the air, wind shrieking as wings cut downward. Sarah screamed, clinging to Eleanor. Sarah cried, "It will strike us." Eleanor held firm, voice steady. Eleanor said, "No, it seeks the sky's throne, not the ground." Daniel stepped forward, defiance in his eyes. Daniel said, "Every strike above echoes below. Its fight is our warning." Richard raised his head, glaring at the shadow ripping across the canyon. Richard said, "Let it claim the air. I will still rise against it." The rival eagle clashed midair with the wounded one, talons locking in vicious combat. Feathers rained like ash, cries louder than thunder. Sarah whispered, "It bleeds again, yet still it fights." Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos. Eleanor said, "Pain is no end. It is the proof of struggle." Daniel's jaw tightened. Daniel said, "One must fall. The other will own the sky." The canyon became their arena, every stone trembling with the battle above. The sky turned battlefield, wings thrashing like blades of war. Daniel said, "They fight not for life, but for dominion." Sarah clutched Eleanor, shaking. Sarah whispered, "If one wins, what becomes of the other?" Eleanor's voice carried sorrow. Eleanor said, "The loser becomes silence, forgotten by the sky." Richard's voice rose, sharp and fierce. Richard said, "Then I will never lose. I will carve my name into the storm." Daniel's eyes hardened, his voice sharp. Daniel said, "Pride blinds faster than pain. Do not mistake their struggle as triumph." Above, the golden eagle struck hard, tearing feathers from its rival. The cry of the wounded echoed, haunting and raw. Sarah gasped, tears filling her eyes. Sarah said, "It hurts to hear, as if the sky itself weeps." Eleanor held her tighter, whispering. Eleanor said, "That pain is the cost of the crown they seek." The canyon roared with feathers, blood, and defiance. The battle raged, but the scarred eagle twisted, slashing back with desperate force. Daniel said, "The wounded do not always fall first." Eleanor's eyes glimmered with respect. Eleanor said, "It rises because survival has no choice." Richard's voice trembled with awe and fury. Richard said, "Even broken, it fights with fire greater than the strong." Sarah gasped as the sky split with their cries. Sarah whispered, "The air itself cannot hold them both." The golden eagle struck again, but the scarred one countered, talons locking, wings thrashing, neither yielding. Daniel's voice was firm, deep. Daniel said, "Dominion is not given, it is torn." Eleanor nodded, her tone solemn. Eleanor said, "And torn with it comes the soul of the earth." Richard clenched his fists tighter, eyes burning. Richard said, "Let them fight, I will rise beyond them both." The canyon thundered with their cries, the struggle unending, each moment heavier than the storm itself. The clash above slowed, not from surrender but exhaustion, their wings shredded and cries raw. Daniel said, "They are not gods, only flesh like ours." Sarah's eyes widened as the scarred eagle faltered, revealing its breast torn open yet still defiant. Sarah whispered, "How can it still fly when it carries death within?" Eleanor's voice softened, yet carried steel. Eleanor said, "Because even dying hearts fight for tomorrow." Richard's fists shook, awe replacing rage. Richard said, "It bleeds more than it breathes, yet it denies the fall." The rival eagle struck again but staggered, talons trembling, its feathers soaked in blood, not its enemies but its own. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Daniel said, "The hunter too is hunted by the weight of hunger." Eleanor's tone turned grave. Eleanor said, "The truth is no enemy survives unscarred. The victor carries wounds unseen." The canyon echoed not with triumph, but with revelation. The air filled with truth sharper than talons. Both warriors carried death inside them. Daniel said, "Victory here is not life, but slower ruin." Sarah clutched Eleanor's arm, whispering. Sarah said, "So even the strongest fall, only later than the weak." Eleanor's voice hardened. Eleanor said, "That is survival's cruel secret. Every triumph is borrowed time." Richard's breathing slowed, his eyes wet with fury. Richard said, "Then what is dominion if not death delayed?" Daniel's jaw clenched. Daniel said, "It is the lie that keeps us fighting when surrender seems easier." Above, the eagles locked again, each tearing, each breaking. Feathers fell like snow, blood streaked the sky. Sarah cried, "The sky bleeds with them." Eleanor held her tighter, whispering. Eleanor said, "Yes, child, the sky remembers every wound." The revelation thundered silently. Conquest was only another face of loss. The scarred eagle twisted violently, tearing loose from its rival, wings trembling yet wide. Daniel said, "It does not flee. It reveals its strength is endurance, not might." Eleanor's eyes sharpened, her voice resolute. Eleanor said the truth. Survival belongs not to the strongest, but the one who refuses to yield. Richard's voice broke with disbelief. Richard said, "Even wounded beyond measure, it claims the sky." Sarah whispered, "It carries death on its wings, yet still it rises." Daniel's tone turned reverent. Daniel said, "That is the hidden law. Strength is not absence of pain, but mastery of it." The rival faltered, chest heaving, feathers dripping, its rage cracking into desperation. Eleanor said, "The predator reveals itself not as eternal, but as mortal as the prey." Sarah's breath caught, her voice a whisper. Sarah said, "Then survival is truth, not glory." The canyon's silence cracked beneath the cries of fading strength. Daniel said, "We watched the storm tear the sky, Now we watch hunger finish the work. Sarah trembled, whispering. Sarah said the storm was merciless. But this is crueler. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her voice cutting. Eleanor said, because cruelty is not weather. It is choice. Richard's fists loosened, his breath ragged. Richard said, they fight to rule a sky that betrays them both. Daniel turned sharply, voice hard. Daniel said, the sky is no throne, only an endless graveyard of wings. The golden eagle stumbled midair, blood raining downward. Sarah cried, it falls. Eleanor held her still. Eleanor said, no, it struggles, for even death demands resistance. The scarred eagle struck, but not with triumph, with desperation equal to its foe. The truth was clear. There was no victor, only survival's endless debt. Blood streaked the dawn sky, but the truth burned clearer than fire. Daniel said, the lie is broken, power is only a mask for fragility. Eleanor's voice was low, steady. Eleanor said, and fragility is not weakness, but the cost of being alive. Sarah sobbed softly, her eyes on the trembling wings above. Sarah whispered, they are not kings, only broken souls, refusing silence. Richard exhaled, rage drained into something deeper. Richard said, then I am no rival to them, I am kin to their struggle. The scarred eagle and its rival both fought still. Neither rising, neither falling, only circling, bound by pain. Daniel's voice grew grim. Daniel said, this is the hidden truth, no victor lives long enough to keep the crown. Eleanor's hand pressed firmly on Sarah's shoulder. Eleanor said, survival is not triumph, it is defiance. The canyon thundered not with conquest but with revelation. The canyon exploded with violence as the two eagles locked talons and plummeted. Daniel shouted, this is the fall of kings. Eleanor's voice was sharp, steady. Eleanor said, not kings, Daniel, survivors bleeding for dominion. Sarah cried out, clutching at Eleanor's cloak. Sarah screamed, they will both die. Richard's eyes burned as he stepped forward, fists clenched. Richard said, then let their death be my lesson. I will not yield to fate. The birds spun downward, wings tearing at each other, their cries piercing the dawn like blades. Daniel's jaw tightened, his voice cutting through the chaos. Daniel said, this is not triumph, this is the price of hunger. Eleanor's grip on Sarah tightened, her eyes sharp. Eleanor said, and that price is never paid in full. The canyon roared with their struggle, every second closer to final impact. The rival eagles struck viciously, beak tearing feathers from the scarred one's neck. Sarah sobbed, her voice trembling. Sarah whispered, it cannot rise again. Daniel's eyes flashed, voice low and hard. Daniel said, never bury one who still breathes. Eleanor's tone carried steel. Eleanor said, the broken often fight hardest. Richard shouted with fury, his voice echoing. Richard said, fight, damn you, fight. Above, the scarred eagle twisted, blood spraying into the dawn as it slammed its talons into its rival's chest. The golden eagle shrieked, staggering midair. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth. Sarah whispered, it struck back. Daniel nodded grimly. Daniel said, pain is its weapon now. Eleanor's voice was cold but certain. Eleanor said, survival writes itself in blood. The sky burned red with their battle, a war of desperation. The rival faltered, but the scarred one staggered too, wings shaking, body breaking. Daniel shouted, both cannot hold, one must fall. Sarah screamed, pressing her face into Eleanor's chest. Sarah said, I cannot watch. Eleanor stroked her hair, eyes fixed on the battle. Eleanor said, you must, the truth is carved in their struggle. Richard's eyes widened as the scarred eagle, bleeding, spread its wings wide, forcing its rival downward. Richard roared, yes, force it down. The golden eagle struck back desperately, ripping deep into its foe's side. Blood poured, raining crimson. Daniel clenched his fists, his voice steady. Daniel said, this is no victory, This is survival's slaughter. Eleanor's voice grew heavy. Eleanor said, and slaughter spares no soul. Their cries filled the canyon, a final chorus of defiance. The two spiraled lower, crashing into jagged winds, wings thrashing like blades. Sarah whispered, voice shaking. Sarah said, the sky cannot hold them. Daniel's voice rumbled harsh. Daniel said, the sky was never theirs to keep. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Eleanor said, the truth is clear, survival is theft, not gift. Richard's fist struck stone, his voice breaking. Richard said, let the strong live, even if broken. Above, the scarred eagle slammed into its rival with all remaining strength, dragging it into the canyon's edge. The rival shrieked, wings folding, crashing against the rocks. Sarah gasped, tears falling. Sarah said, it falls. Daniel whispered, and so the crown is bought with blood. Eleanor's tone was grave. Eleanor said, but the victor bleeds deeper still. The canyon trembled with the echo of their collision. Silence followed the collision, broken only by ragged wing beats. Daniel said, the sky holds one no longer. Sarah whispered, then it is over. Eleanor's eyes stayed sharp, her tone heavy. Eleanor said, no, child, survival never ends, it only changes hands. Richard stared upward, chest heaving. Richard said, the scarred one lives, yet death walks beside it. The eagle, broken and bleeding, rose slowly, wings trembling, shadow vast against the dawn. Sarah gasped, awe in her voice. Sarah said, it still rises. Daniel's voice lowered, reverent. Daniel said, even shattered, it claims the sky. Eleanor nodded. Eleanor said, the lesson is written. Victory is not glory but defiance in ruin. Richard's fists loosened, his rage quieted. Richard whispered, then I too will rise, broken if I must. The canyon's silence was no peace. It was the crown's cost. The canyon lay hushed, its silence vast and heavy, broken only by the ragged wing beats of the scarred eagle. Daniel said, the sky accepts no victory, only survival. Eleanor's voice was steady yet mournful. Eleanor said, every crown drips blood, and every survivor carries its weight. Sarah clung tightly, her voice trembling. Sarah whispered, it flies, but it is dying. Richard stared upward, his jaw clenched but softened. Richard said, it should not rise, yet it does. That is its dominion. The eagle circled, its shadow stretching wide, but its body sagged with exhaustion. Daniel muttered, it endures, but not forever. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she whispered, the cost is always greater than the prize. Sarah cried softly, I cannot cheer for its pain. Richard shook his head, his voice raw. Richard said, pain is its language, and it speaks louder than kings. The eagle staggered in its flight, wing dragging, feathers scattering like ash. Sarah whispered, it cannot last. Daniel's voice was low. Daniel said, survival is measured not by how long you fly, but by refusing to fall. Eleanor's words cut sharp. Eleanor said, it flies on memory, not strength. Richard's fists loosened, voice soft. Richard said, even dying, it rules the sky. The canyon echoed faintly with each ragged cry, not triumph but haunting truth. Sarah shivered, pressing her face into Eleanor's side. Sarah said, it hurts to watch, yet I cannot look away. Daniel stared upward, eyes burning. Daniel said, because pain is the only truth we trust. Eleanor's tone softened. Eleanor said, the sky keeps no record of glory, only of scars. Richard muttered, and scars are eternal. The eagle turned slowly, its body pulling against the inevitable. The eagle wavered, nearly falling before catching itself with trembling wings. Daniel said, every rise is defiance. Sarah's eyes widened, her voice cracked. Sarah said, why does it not surrender? Eleanor's tone was sharp, unwavering. Eleanor said, because surrender is death before death comes. Richard's chest heaved as he whispered, "It has nothing left, yet still it climbs." The canyon filled with the ragged sound of wings, each beat a war cry. Daniel muttered, "It proves what storms cannot. Survival is not mercy, it is will." Eleanor pulled Sarah closer, her gaze steady. Eleanor said, "It is the law of life itself." Sarah whispered, "Then pain is life." Richard's eyes burned. Richard said, "And I will not fear it." The eagle rose slowly, shadow vast, though its body was broken. The eagle's shadow stretched across the canyon walls, larger than its broken form. Daniel said, "The shadow lies. It hides the cost." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her tone steady. Eleanor said, "But it also tells the truth. Even broken, it rules." Sarah trembled, her voice hushed. Sarah said, "It is more than alive. It is memory." Richard's voice cracked, half awe, half rage. Richard said, "Then I will carve my shadow to outlast my body." The eagle faltered, feathers raining down like dying stars. Daniel's fists tightened. Daniel said, "Every shadow fades, but its moment is eternal." Eleanor's grip on Sarah grew firmer. Eleanor said, "Then let this moment live in you, child." Sarah nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. Sarah whispered, "I will remember its flight even if it falls." The eagle circled once more, wings shaking, its cry sharp and final. Daniel whispered, "It has given all." Eleanor's voice was heavy, steady. Eleanor said, "This is resolution, not peace, not triumph, but ending." Sarah wept quietly, her words trembling. Sarah said, "It dies, yet it still flies." Richard's jaw quivered, his voice hoarse. Richard said, "Then death is not defeat." The eagle rose higher, staggering, then turned toward the horizon. Daniel muttered, "The storm began here, but the flight ends there." Eleanor's hand pressed Sarah's shoulder. Eleanor said, "The circle is complete, we return to silence." Sarah whispered, "But silence feels alive now." Richard exhaled deeply, whispering, "Alive because we carry its cry." The canyon quieted, its echo eternal, its truth absolute. Nothing survives unchanged. The horizon glowed crimson as the scarred eagle faded into distance, its cry carrying like a thread between worlds. Daniel whispered, "Its voice lingers though its wings break." Eleanor's eyes glimmered, her tones soft yet unyielding. Eleanor said, "Voices die, but echoes live forever." Sarah trembled, pressing her face to Eleanor's side. Sarah whispered, "I still hear it, even when it is gone." Richard's jaw tightened, his voice raw. Richard said, "That cry is burned into the sky." The canyon absorbed the sound, every rock holding memory, every shadow carrying its weight. Daniel said, "Survival ends, but its song remains." Eleanor's gaze cut across the horizon. Eleanor said, "That song is the final gift, a warning, a prayer, a truth." Sarah whispered, "Then we will not forget." Richard looked skyward, his fists unclenching at last. Richard said, "I carry it in me, as it carried its pain in flight." The canyon quieted, but the echo of wings still haunted the air. Daniel said, "The silence now is not emptiness, it is memory." Sarah whispered, "I feel it inside me, like a heartbeat not my own." Eleanor stroked her hair gently, her voice firm. Eleanor said, "That is survival's legacy, it lives where eyes cannot see." Richard's gaze fixed upward, jaw trembling. Richard said, "I thought strength was rule, but I see now strength is endurance." Daniel muttered, "And endurance does not last forever, only its shadow does." Sarah clung tighter, tears streaking her face. Sarah said, "I will keep its shadow with me." Eleanor's tone was resolute. Eleanor said, "Then its struggle is not lost, it becomes yours." Richard exhaled, voice low. Richard said, "Then I will carry its cry as my own." The echo stretched endless, heavy and unbroken. The wind shifted, carrying the eagle's cry back across the canyon, faint but piercing. Sarah gasped, voice breaking. Sarah whispered, "It calls still." Daniel's eyes lifted sharply, his voice reverent. Daniel said, "No. It is the echo, a memory carved into the wind." Eleanor's voice was steady, almost like prayer. Eleanor said, "Echoes are not ghosts, they are truths repeated." Richard closed his eyes, fists loosening. Richard said, "Then I will not forget, I will rise as it did, even in ruin." The canyon carried the sound farther, a haunting reminder no silence could bury. Sarah whispered, "It will never leave me." Daniel said, "Good, let it remain, for survival's law is not to win, but to be remembered." Eleanor nodded, voice heavy. Eleanor said, "And we remember, always." The sun lifted higher, shadows fading though memory stayed heavy. Daniel said, "The sky clears, yet its cry still rules." Eleanor's eyes softened, her voice sharp with meaning. Eleanor said, "Because survival is not a crown but an echo." Sarah whispered, "Then no one truly leaves." Richard exhaled, jaw clenched, his voice hushed. Richard said, "Not if we carry them in us." The canyon glowed under morning light, but every stone held the weight of what they had seen. Daniel's tone grew solemn. Daniel said, "The storm began with fury, it ends with silence, yet both leave scars." Eleanor pressed her arm protectively around Sarah. Eleanor said, "Scars are the echoes written on us." Sarah whispered, "Then I too am an echo." Richard lifted his gaze, voice strong. Richard said, "And I will not be silenced." The canyon fell into stillness, but the echo of wings remained like fire in their hearts. Daniel said, "This silence is the crown of survival." Eleanor's voice softened. Eleanor said, "And crowns are not worn, they are carried." Sarah whispered, "Then I will carry it with me always." Richard's voice cracked but held resolve. Richard said, "So will I, though I bleed as it bled." The horizon shimmered, glowing with warmth that felt eternal yet fleeting. Daniel said, "We began in chaos, we end in silence, but silence sings now." Eleanor nodded, her voice heavy. Eleanor said, "It is the last gift, the echo that will not fade." Sarah whispered, "I hear it still." Richard looked skyward, his jaw unclenched, his voice a vow. Richard said, "And I will keep hearing it, until I too am an echo." The sky held no kings, only voices carried forever.